This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So yesterday we discussed about high level, about the Appium tool, where it is used, and what kind of languages it supports, and as well as what kind of uh, applications it support, right? And we also gone through the course content. So what kind of course coverage we have. So that is something which we have seen yesterday. So today, let's deal with the APM architecture. So try to understand um, APM architecture, and as well as what kind of installations probably would be required for us and why, right? So this probably we would try to understand. Okay. So now, so APM, it was built um, initially to work on iOS, right? To deal with the iOS and iOS related applications. And once the Android comes came into picture, so that's where the APM has evolved, and it's from 2013, I guess, or somewhere around that. So we have got Android into the market. So wherein it has disrupted the market like anything, right? As you all know, like majority of the mobile phones right now, they work using Android because again, that's an open source, right? So now, so a significant funding and boosting was done, such that the team has revisited the APM and the project to be entirely rewritten using Node.js. So what was that? We migrated from C sharp to Node.js, right? And then what else? So now the every functionality related to the automation with respect to the APM, they all got changed. Okay, when they migrated it from C sharp to the Node.js. Okay, so then they have called it as, once it is migrated, they have called it as APM 2.0. Now this APM 2.0, it works for iOS and Android, right? So this is how it has evolved. Okay, and now let's talk about its popularity. So what is this with the features that it come and the benefits that it has, right? So APM has earned an immense popularity in the market. What is that? One is the cross platform. Yesterday we discussed, right? One is the cross platform compatibility. That means it works for iOS, it works for Android applications, it also works for Tizen, it also works for web, right? Web browsers. It also works for desktop OS like Windows and Mac, and then it also runs on it can able to execute and test on the TVs, right? Android TV, any other TVs. So we can just run, I mean, write our scripts, execute them seamlessly across multiple platforms, right? That is what the cross platform is, right? And then it supports the programming languages. So what programming languages? C sharp, Java, Python, Ruby. I'm not sure now who is Ruby, using Ruby. Most of the projects they fall under this. Okay, Ruby and JavaScript and many other programming languages. So now the testers and developers, they can just leverage these any of these languages and then start working on it, right? Correct. And for first and foremost thing is it is free and open source. Correct. It is free and open source. That's where again it has an added advantage, right? And now the other part is its compatibility with frameworks. So what testing frameworks you have?
Test
What
engine,
else? Hmm.
page object model.
That's a model. Okay. Let's leave about model. We are only talking about the frameworks. TestNG, JUnit. What else?
BDD.
Hybrid.
BDD, Cucumber,
Hybrid.
Hybrid. Yeah. I mean, those are all features that we keep adding into the framework, right? So I am only talking about the, I mean, specifically about the framework. So it is TestNG, JUnit, Cucumber, and as well as if I go for Python, it would be like PyTest. If I go for C sharp, it would be NUnit, MS Test, right? So you can integrate this app Appium with any of these frameworks, right? So its compatibility with these frameworks has gained more popularity for it, right? And then what else? So you would have Appium drivers similar to Selenium WebDriver. So we will talk about it, and we can also able to test native and web apps, right? So what is this native? Which are called native apps?
Mm, Mobile app.
Okay. So mobile apps, I understand, but why they are called as native?
They developed in Android platform or iOS platform, then it's called native.
Correct. So specifically designed and developed for a particular operating system. It doesn't mean just about Android or iOS. If you see there is Windows as well. So Windows mobiles are also there, and then there are certain other OS as well, right? So other than Android and iOS, so it can be any OS, but specifically if you have designed any app based upon the OS, that is Android or iOS or any other mobile OS, so then you call them as native apps. Those are platform specific. So for Android, so if you take an example like let's say like WhatsApp, okay, so now WhatsApp application, they design specifically for Android separately. There would be separate installation and installables. In the similar way, for iOS, right? I cannot bring in iOS application and install it on the Android, correct? And vice versa. So that is where it is platform specific. So whenever you have the applications that are platform specific, then we call them as native apps. Clear on this part? And the other one would be web apps. So which can be accessible, I mean the mobile app, but still it could be accessible within the browser, right? It runs within the browser. So when the mobile application runs within the browser, it's called as web app. Clear on this part? Are we clear? Hello, are you people with
Yes,
me? Yeah.
yes, yes.
Okay. So now let me proceed to the architecture. So now architecture of Appium is a bit similar to Selenium. So what is that? You have Appium client. So what is this Appium client? This is where you come up with your scripting. I mean, uh, the scripts that is either in Java, Python, or C Sharp, Ruby, right? Any of these languages. Now, and then you have, as I told you, it's Appium 2.0, Appium version 2. Okay, this is nothing but your server. Okay, so what server? It would be Appium desktop server, right? And plugins, and then inspector. All this setup would be there in Appium version 2 server. Okay, so what is this? What are this inspector for? Inspector helps us to identify the elements, locate the elements, right, on the application, on the mobile applications. So that's where ideally this inspector would help us. And as well as when it is mainly helping the Appium to understand a locator or the element web. It could be a web mobile application element, or it could be a native app element, right? Whichever elements you have, so those would be, I mean, identified with the help of inspector. Okay, so now when I say Appium drivers, so within this Appium, so I need to have a driver specifically, that is the Appium driver. So what drivers those would be? Like drivers are the one which helps, right? Which helps us to integrate our communication between the client and the server, right? Between the client and the server. So drivers are the one, probably you can call them as middleware, which would help to communicate between the client and the server, right? So now, what is this Appium client? Appium client comprises of language specific libraries or SDKs. Okay, I can call this as language specific libraries or SDK. So if you are using Java, you would install the Java SDK into your local machine, right? So that SDK and your Java language, these all are like Appium client. Now what happens? There should be some medium of exchange which need to happen, right, from Appium client to the server. So how does it do? Any idea on it?
Through Node.js,
Okay.
it will compress into JSON script, JSON format.
Mm-hmm. So there is one protocol through which it interacts with the server. It could be Node.js. I mean, we have our scripting with respect to the servers and I mean all other inspectors and everything on Node.js platform. But when it comes to this interaction between the client and the server, it happens using protocol. This is the middleware for us. What is that? W3C protocol. So what is this W3C? Anyone have um, idea on Selenium? Have you ever worked on Selenium? It's
Yes.
a similar one, right? Probably in Selenium as well. We might have um, heard about this one. Yes? No? It is World Wide Web Consortium, right? What is this World Wide Web Consortium? It's an international organization. So that actually develops the standards for any of the open source applications, right? So what happens? So if we do not have any specific standards that we need to follow, so there could be again, uh, major disruptions in the market, right? Everyone would come up with their own specific, way of architecting the things, and then come up with some new tools every now and then, right? So what happens is there would be a challenge for the people, uh, and as well as there would be trust issues as well, right? When you keep coming up with lots of modifications, changes which are not up to certain standards, and then we just say like this is the open source platform that I have come up with, you just utilize it and you give it in the market, right? So now it would be difficult for the uh, people to trust and then use those applications, right? So that's where, so World Wide Web Consortium they formed. It's an international organization which actually defines the technical specifications for any technologies related to the web, right? Be it web standards or be it accessibility, be it privacy and security, web performance, right? Mobile and device independence. I mean, with respect to mobile, there would be certain guidelines, and those standards need to be adhered when we work on it, right? So, what is the role of W3C in WebDriver standard for APM and browser automation? So, what they did, they standardized the WebDriver protocol, okay? So, which is used for browser automation, allowing the tools like Selenium and Appium to interact with the browsers in a uniform way, right? So what happened? They have come up with this kind of protocol, right? Which already has the standards implemented in such a way that this would be able to interact with your browsers, and as well as it would be able to interact with your apps, right? So this is something W3C World Wide Web Consortium. So that is where WWW. So they call it as W3. Okay. So that came into picture. So they have come up with certain protocol which would have this. And now we have drivers as well, right? What drivers we have? Uh, XCUI test driver. For what purpose this driver would be used?
for iOS.
Yes, for iOS. Correct. And then you have Safari driver. You have Kiko driver. You have Chrome, right? And you have Tizen driver. You have UI Automator 2 driver. So these are all some of the drivers that we have. So these would help us to make the interaction onto the application, right? So these are all the drivers which we have, and those can be utilized in order to work with Android, sorry, iOS, Windows, and as well as any other, let's call it as tvOS, any other tvOS as well, right? So there are certain drivers that we need to have, okay, such that it would enable us to work with our applications, interact with our applications, right? So the Appium server, it serves as a crucial intermediary within the framework, right? Where is that Appium server? Something like this, Appium server, desktop server, right? This one, right? So what it does, it interacts with it. I mean, it enables that interaction with the mobile applications. So what happens? It is the one which receives the instructions from your test script. So where is your test script sitting? It's at the client side, right? It sits at the client side. But the server enables us to interact, right, with the actual application. So now this, whatever commands you give, those would go through this W3C protocol and would be handed over to Appium server, and this server would what is that, process them, and then start interacting with the application using this one of these drivers, right? That's how it works. Now, so what is this? Your communication, whether you run on the physical device or on an emulator. What is emulator?
Like browser stack.
Virtual form of physical device.
Emulator or simulator?
Virtual form of your physical device.
Right. Virtual form of physical device. It's all virtual, right? Now, emulator is when we work with Android. Simulator is when we work with iOS. So wherein, let's say, let's take a scenario where I want to test WhatsApp. So now, see, when it is a web application, so it is very much easy for us to test those applications. We never worry about the, the kind of version and the kind of maximity it would have, right? When I say maximity, probably let's talk about this like iOS. Okay, so if I am trying to test the WhatsApp application on iOS, there are certain iOS updates that are ready to be rolled off into the market. So before that, they want to test. And now, how your requirements would be? If it is a web, just people would say like the functionality related. What is that? Requirements, or whether they would have something like the application should work across the browsers. That's all, right? So those would be the major thing. So it should be able to, application should be able to access on the browsers, and on every browser it should work, okay. But when it comes to mobile applications, it would be very difficult for us. What kind of difficulty or the challenge that we have? So people, I mean, the iOS, when they were trying, Apple is trying to release or roll off the version, latest version. Uh, they will say this OS version would support for from iOS, let's say Apple iOS mobiles, right from iOS 8, okay, to till now, okay. So now think about the mobiles, how many mobiles we have within Apple. So you have iPhone SE, you have iPhone, you have iPhone, what was that, the other devices, uh, something like, um, what are the other devices that we have in iPhone? Let me check. So iPhone Pro, iPhone Max, right? There are lots of mobile devices. Though the iOS version probably would be same, right? But you have different devices with different kinds of configuration and setup, right? It's a display, everything would change. The camera settings, setup, that also would change, right? So considering these, think about it. If I need to test it by having each model of phone in hand in order to test it, it would be really difficult, right? It may not be feasible every time. It would involve in huge costs. I cannot. Let's go, even if it is not an iPhone, let's take Android. Android has more uh, penetration into the market, right? Samsung uses it, Oppo uses it. Now if I want to test for each of these mobile devices and get those mobile devices, so maybe some crores and crores of rupees I need to invest, because there are lots of mobiles which run on Android. So I cannot now keep every device locally, right? That's where emulator comes into picture, right? So what is that? We can connect a real device, we can connect a real device to the server and automate the tests and execute them. Okay, that is one way of doing it, but that is not feasible every time, right? Everywhere you may not be able to get the real device connected and then test it. So that's where we go to emulators. Clear on this part? Clear? So what is your end device? End device would be your emulator or a simulator. So that would be your end device, right? It just what we say, like reciprocates the way how, or the version how it is been in a mobile device. It can be a Samsung, or it can be a iOS. Within iOS again there would be different version of mobiles, right? We can load any mobile through the emulator. So we just mimic the things virtually, okay, such that it would enable us to test the device and the applications, right? So that's how it works. Clear till here? Any questions? Any questions?
No.
Shall I proceed? Okay.
Yeah,
So
this
now,
one question. These emulators or simulators,
hmm,
is it available free of cost along with this
some are
this
free, some they charge. Okay, it again depends. So I used one of the emulators which is chargeable as well. Okay, so I mean licensed one. So involves some cost, and certain ones are free. Okay, we will talk about it in detail in further sessions. Okay,
okay,
so
okay.
now, yeah, so
Sir,
now,
sorry, I have a question. Can we
yeah,
use our real device as well while testing? Because these
yes, yes,
emulator and simulator might
uh,
be bit slower as compared to your real device.
right. That is where, I mean, as I told you, we can have our device connected, we can test it, but every
Okay.
time it may not be possible because it would involve huge cost. So though, see, there are many factors that play into picture when we try to come up with some effective automation, right? So now,
Hmm.
so here there could be, see, it all depends on the approach that we want to go with. Okay, when I say we, again it depends on the client as well, right? I would say like, okay, I need ipad, I need iphone, various versions, ipad, and then the macbook to test the WhatsApp application. Okay, so for testing that one single application, probably, if you need to buy these many devices, and these are cost, these are with huge cost, right? It involves huge cost. Now it depends on client. If the client is okay with it, I mean, if they have that budgeting allowed, then you can definitely go with the specific devices which you want to test, and then you can connect those devices and then run the scripts directly on the devices itself. So there would be certain places where you may not, let's say like android. So within the android, so you have huge number of I mean phones. Now I cannot bring in every phone,
Hmm.
right?
So normally
So
we target
hmm,
versions because in my
hmm,
company I have all these devices they have given me physically, and we
that is what,
target
it all
version like
depends on the budget. Right. So it
okay.
depends on the project budget and availability. Accordingly, they'll do.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Shri, no one question.
Yeah, tell me.
So for doing POC, connecting to device will be a more cost optimum solution, right? If we are having couple
Yes.
of
I
devices.
mean, yes, if it is. I mean, just if you confine your POC to a single device, so it
Mhm.
is cost effective. Okay. But if your POC you wanted to, um, even, I mean, for that also you need not to buy the device, right? So that is again involves cost. So even for doing POC, you can use emulator.
Okay.
So you can use the emulator, try to emulate it, and then run the tests on the emulator. So if your POC is good, holds good. So if you confine your testing to specific devices, then it's all about the approach, right? So if your approach, your scope itself, you are defining your scope and stating that, okay, I only test iPhone 16.
Yeah.
Okay, so now if I am here to test only iPhone 16, I need one device, I can buy it out. Okay, if based upon the project budget, I can buy the device if client sponsors it, and I can connect it and test the applications on iOS 16, right?
Okay.
iOS,
Okay.
I mean iPhone 16, right, device. So similarly, if there are some multiple devices, then even doing the POC also, it may not be cost effective, right? You need to get each and every device. Why you need to do that is where this emulators come into picture, right? To save the costs, project costs,
Okay.
to cut off the project costs. So we have these emulators, so you can do the POC on the emulator itself if you are okay to proceed with, and then you have defined your project scope for a definite uh, devices for which you need to test. Then you can probably reach out to the client, I mean to the stakeholders, and tell them that these are the devices for which we want to test, and probably we could buy those devices. So they can go ahead, buy the devices, and provide those devices to you. Or rather, they might ask, based upon their project budgets and other stuff, they might ask you to use emulator itself. If they are good to go with emulators, we can go with emulator. It saves cost, right?
Um, Only thing like we use browser stack in our project, but that is
Hmm.
the license is very costly.
Correct.
So
Yes.
getting approval on that
Yes,
part
yes.
is becoming a difficult
But
task. So I'm just
but
looking for other
no,
options.
browser stack altogether it has different advantages as well. It also emulates the things, right, for you.
Yeah.
So whichever device you want to, you select the device OS version, and so it emulates, right? So it also emulates, but it is chargeable, right? That is what I said. Somebody asked me a question previously, whether it is free or open source or licensed one. So certain emulators are licensed versions, and there are certain which are open source. So it all depends on the coverage and the scope that we get. So now, and as well as the support that we get. In case if my emulator is not working, it is throwing some issues, right? When it is throwing certain issues, somebody would be there to help me, right, from the team, if it is a licensed version. So likewise, for that they go to the licensed version. Likewise, so I have worked in both the scenarios. One for testing certain applications on iPad. So client has provided, in the mainly in the banking projects, they do not want to, you know, what is that? They do not want to use probably emulators most of the time in some of the critical applications. So they just want offline, iPad they have provided. So we just installed the application over it, and then we connect that device and test it. So that's one way of testing it. The other way is using emulators. These are the two ways how you can probably, define your testing, right? So
One last question as follow-up.
mhm,
So, but the
mhm,
default emulator, whatever comes, I think with Android Studio and all, like, is it
mhm.
fast enough?
uh, Okay, so there are, I mean, there are challenges. Okay, when it is a default emulator or the open source emulator that you try to use, so you have certain challenges there. So we will discuss down the lane. Okay, when we go
Sure.
to these sessions, right? When we discuss about the emulator in detail and the setup as well. So at that time we will discuss on these lines what advantages we have, what disadvantages we have, right? So accordingly then, probably you people would be able to take a call as well. Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
so
Sir, one quick
what?
question. Can we
Mhm.
do parallel execution on like Android and iOS same time?
We can. So
We
again,
can.
we can do it. Possibility is there, I mean, uh, so the approach that we take, so it would be like, you know from the DevOps pipeline, right? We can build two different stages, one for Android, one for iOS, because the emulators are also different, no, altogether. So its SDKs, everything will differ. So we can do it. So we can trigger both. If you have such kind of, infra that supports to execute our scripts simultaneously at Android and as well as iOS, we can do it. Possible, right? That's where. So strategy is something which we need to come up with, and then implementation of that strategy. These are the things which are required. So we would see down the line certain things with respect to parallel execution as well. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So now,
Okay, thank you.
what are the prerequisites for this Appium automation? One is the language proficiency. So either one of the languages you need, right? Python, Java, JavaScript, right? Then only you could be able to effectively work with Appium. Agree on it? Agree? That's the first and foremost thing. And then access to the mobile devices. So it necessitates us to access the physical mobile devices or the emulators, right? To perform the automation testing. So not all the emulators are free versions, right? And when we have free versions, again, there are certain challenges that are involved, correct? So we need to have access to mobile devices, either physical or the emulator, through the emulators or simulators, right? Accepted. And now the next one is about your Appium server installation. To interact with these mobile devices and execute your automation scripts, so we need to install the Appium server on your system, right? That's one thing. And then the application for testing. You should have an application to test, right? So you need to install that mobile application that you intend to test. Okay. And then from there, the platform specific SDK. So be it Android or iOS. So accordingly, we need to install our SDK on the machine, right? That is also necessary. And then the Appium client library. What is this client library? Upon the chosen language, right? What you do is you also need to install that particular client library. Let's say if I'm going with Java, so I also need Java SDK and Java related installations, right, on my client machine in order to facilitate my automation. And then the Appium inspector, as I told you, Appium inspector, it is for element identifications. So what is an element and what is this identification, what locators we would have, what kind of location on the screen, and the properties that we view, we will talk about it in detail. Okay, how to use this Appium inspector, we will talk about it in further sessions as well. And then the device or the emulator, as we already discussing, right? And then uh, what else are required? Anything left? We covered device or the emulator, Appium inspector, client, SDK, uh, Appium server installations, mobile devices, programming language, right? Yeah, that's all, I guess. Then we need to come up with our own solid groundwork such that we seamlessly, try to automate and test the mobile applications. Clear on this part? So these are the prerequisites. So if we have all this in place, so we would see one after the other in the further classes, like the installations, the setup, everything. But primarily these are the ones. Okay, preconditional setup, prerequisites for us to go ahead and automate and test the applications. So we need to have this programming language, access to mobile devices, Appium server installation, uh, application for testing. So we also need to consider an application to test, right? And then the platform specific SDK, client library, Appium inspector, device or the emulators configurations. That's all. So these are the ones which are required. Agree on this part?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so before proceeding further, I mean, it involves certain installations. So I would stop the session here and we will take it up tomorrow.
One question, Shrinu.
Yeah.
Are there any scenarios which cannot be automated? I mean, it might be too early, just out of curiosity, I'm asking. Like,
Mhm.
uh, how can we handle OTP or like any
Hmm.
particular scenarios which can't be automated, which is out of scope?
So the things you yourself mentioned, like it is out of scope. When it is out of scope, so that is where I'm saying, right? first we need to define our scope. We will discuss on this part as well. Okay, there are certain things which probably manually we tested but not through automation, and there are certain things that have workarounds as well. Okay, probably we do certain workaround. It is not like actually you are testing the multi-factor authentication or the OTP part, but there are certain workarounds for them as well, right? So we can discuss about this when we were talking about such kind of scenarios, right, during our
Okay,
sessions. So we will
sure.
talk about this. Okay, so there are workarounds which we do usually. So even for multi-factor authentication, so it is not automatable, right? So what we do, so we just keep it out of scope. That particular part we keep it out of scope. In general I'm talking. Okay,
Okay.
and then there are other workarounds probably. What we can do is we request the team to get always, a OTP that don't change, never, or OTP that never expires. Okay, so we ask them to configure in such a way for initial testing purpose in the local or the non-production environment. So that is also possible. Or the other way around is, uh, so we consider, the ultimate thing is when you authorize. So what happens is it would generate a token for us, right? And that token would be utilized across the application interaction, correct? So something when it comes, so from the UI, when you submit it at the API end, so it would generate a bearer token, and that bearer token is something which says that you are authorized to access so and so modules within the application. So now we can consider capturing that bearer token and utilize it. Okay, so that is also possible. So instead of directly logging in using the multi-factor authentication, what I would do is I would use the login function, I mean API call, which would generate the bearer token. I can utilize it further, that bearer token, within the for logging into the application, and from there again I continue with my UI. So likewise also we can do, and there are certain other ways as well. So we will discuss on them.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
So, so it's possible to make backend calls and take the tokens and all that through
Yes.
APM
Yes.
code itself. Okay. Okay. Got it.
We can do that. I mean,
Oh,
not APM, but we can able to capture it. It is possible to capture.
okay.
APM again specifically for UI, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there
Developer
we
tools for
probably
that, yes.
require some mix and mix of other um, package as well. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, we will discuss in detail. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so we'll be stopping here. Okay. Let's
Thanks a lot.
continue our session tomorrow. Thank you.